Have you ever found yourself in a crisis thinking, man, if I had just known, if I had only known, if I'd only known that this week when it's going to turn cold again, that the water heater was going to break and literally spill its guts all over my floor. If I'd only known, right? Especially before I just paid for that spring break trip. Now what am I going to do? If I'd only known. If I'd only known my car insurance wasn't going to cover all the damages to the car before I got it in the shop. If I'd only known that there was going to be a pop quiz this week in that one test, in that one class where I literally need every point I can get to pass, and now what do? Sometimes we wish that we could know and understand things ahead of time. Sometimes we wish we had the understanding of what was taking place. And it's one of the reasons we're kind of looking at this book of the book of Daniel, this section of the Bible that tells the story, reminds us the story of this guy named Daniel, who was in exile, who was taken from his country as a young teenage boy, taken to this other country, trained there, kind of had his whole culture change. We talked about that last week. And it's just a story after sort of crisis after crisis as he finds himself in situations oftentimes not of his own making. And I have to wonder how many times Daniel asked himself, if I had only known. But what could he have done differently? So just to kind of a quick little background to kind of the whole book of Daniel, I think there's a central point to Daniel and its prophecies, and oftentimes we go to the book looking at the prophecies to kind of say, hey, this is what's going to happen, when is this going to happen? And I don't think that's the point at all. Because I think it's a story of this group of people that were taken out of their country, with God intending that to take place. And then trying to figure out life in this new place, and as he's there, discovering some things about God and about himself. But here's a central point of Daniel's prophecy. Number one, that God doesn't just know the future, that he is sovereign over it. Now, if you want to have an interesting discussion with your own self and thought process, go and do a comparison between the word sovereign and the word control. Because oftentimes in places like churches, places like this, and even if you're not a religious person, you've probably heard a Christian or another religious person say something to the fact that God is in control, right? But sometimes we run into trouble when we make that statement, God is in control, because we say God's in control, and then somebody says, well, what about, right? If God's in control, why are all these literally hundreds of people dying every day in South Sudan? I mean, if God's in control, that doesn't look so good for God, right? And it's interesting, you can even do a little search of your Bible, those of you who like to do that kind of stuff, and discover where in the Bible it ever says that God is in control. And how many times it actually says that. Compared to how many times it says that God is sovereign. Because sovereign means God has sort of ultimate sort of influence and control over things, but he's not involved in every little detail of life, every little kind of piece. He isn't sort of responsible for all this kind of stuff. And I think prophecy helps understand that God doesn't just know the future, he's sovereign over it, that he does influence things, that he does put some things in place, but he doesn't do everything that way. And secondly, he only reveals to us the portions that are good for us to know. Oftentimes we're really broad things, broad strokes. He doesn't give us every little detail about things. In fact, the prophecy that we're not going to look at today, but actually is in your bulletin, a little explanation of the whole dream that Nebuchadnezzar has here. We're going to just talk about the portion of Daniel, but because I think it applies to this whole thing with Daniel. Because the reality is, some things are best discovered as they happen. How many of you ever had a surprise birthday party thrown for you? All right, quite a few. How many of you knew there was a surprise coming up? Yeah, you're the people that nobody likes to throw parties for, right? You know, they try to surprise you, and I knew it the whole time. Why we do it? But you know, sometimes not knowing ahead of time, because some of you get surprise birthday parties because they know you don't want a birthday party, but the only way for them to be able to celebrate it is to throw the surprise, right? In fact, there's an author, a guy named Rick Riordan, writes, knowing too much of your future is never a good thing. But how often do you think, if I only knew if I could just, knew the future, if I knew what the stock market was going to do next week, couple weeks, I would change how I invest. If I knew what the lottery numbers, some of you would say, honestly, right? If I knew what the lottery numbers were going to hit this next time, I'd go down and do it, right? If I knew. But sometimes knowing is not the best thing for us. What would life be like if we knew literally everything about the future? How many of you, just kind of question for my own curiosity, nobody else's curiosity, my own curiosity, how many of you would like to know when you were going to die? I see a couple of people, all right? Would it make a difference if you knew it was like 40 or 50 years in the future, or if it was like next week? How about how you were going to die? Would you want to know how you were going to die? Some of you want to know how you want to die, really? And the reason we think to ourselves, I knew when I was going to die or how I was going to die, I'd try to avoid that situation so I wouldn't. But if that's what's going to happen, it's going to happen, right? I mean, think about it. Would you really want to know that the friends that you think you're so close to now are not going to be your friends forever? Would you want to know that the marriage you're involved in now that you thought was going to last forever doesn't? Do you want to know what's going to happen to your kids? Those kids that break your heart all the time. And to know what's going to happen in 5 years from now, and every day your heart is broken again. See, there's a reason that God gives us broad sweeps, but God doesn't give us all the details. He only gives us what's important for us to know, because He knows if He gave us too much, it would be too much. And so sometimes the best place for us is really finding ourselves between that rock and that hard place and not knowing what's going to happen until we find ourselves in that spot. And that's where we're going today. But before we go there, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, all right? Lord, some of us in this room and watching online today have had a really bad week. Some of us found ourselves in situations asking ourselves, if I had only known, we would have made different choices, different plans. We wouldn't have spent some of the money we did. But we are thankful again to remind ourselves that you really are sovereign, that you really do know everything. All the past, all the present, all the future, not just of this world, but even of our own lives. And we are thankful at moments when you give us glimpses of what might be. And we're also thankful at times when you don't let us know those things until we get to that place. But today, as we go back 2,600 years and read this old story, I pray again we can be encouraged by the life of someone who found himself so consistently in his rocks and hard places. And that maybe we can learn something from what he did that would encourage us. So again, we ask you to speak to us. Again, through your word, in your name. Amen. If you want to follow along, we're over in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, and it begins this way. During Nebuchadnezzar's second year as king, he had dreams that bothered, that has agitated him and kept him awake at night. He has these dreams and they're really bothering him, right? And so the king called for, and that is summoned his enchanters, his diviners, his sorcerers, and wise men, these astrologers. He got his whole group together, all these advisors, and he had sort of a little bit of everything. You know, had the people that would cut open little chicken livers and tell you from the insides of chicken livers what was going to happen. It was a thing back then. It's not kind of a thing today, thankfully, because I'm not sure I want to be cutting chicken livers open to decide my life. But, it was a thing back then, and they had the diviners. They would kind of divine thing, they would lay out stuff. There were people that, the sorcerers, the wizards, the magicians, astrologers, about all the stars and all this kind of stuff. So, the daily horoscope is not just a modern thing. It's been around for thousands of years. And so he brought them all together because they're his advisors. As you're king, you want advice. You want to know somebody who's tapped into the gods and give us some advice. So he gets them all together and he says this to them. I had a dream that bothers me, that my spirit is agitated, and I want to know what it means. Now, if I was to say today, last night I had a really disturbing dream. It just really bothers me. I'm at my wit's end about what it's about. But I can't sleep. I can't live with myself until I know the answer. And I said to you, tell me what my dream was. Tell me what the answer is. You would say to me what? Tell us your dream, right? Which is exactly what the guys do. The wise men, the astrologers, answer the king, and they say, "O king, live forever," because apparently that's how you talk to a king back then. Very reverent. "O king, live forever. Please tell us, your servants, your dream. Then we will tell you what it means. That will interpret it. Which seems like a reasonable thing to say, right? To which the king says, I meant what I said. You must tell me the dream and what it means. And then he kind of ramps up and lets them know how agitated he is. Because he says, if you don't, I will have you torn apart. That is limb from limb, and I will turn your houses into piles of stone. He's pretty ticked off, right? I mean, he is worked up by this dream. And he's so much saying, if you don't have the answer for me, I'm going to tear you apart. Your house is going to be ruined. I'm going to ruin everything in your life. But if you tell me my dream and its meaning, that its interpretation, I will reward you with gifts and a reward and great honor. So tell me the dream and what it means. Now, if again I was to come to you today and say, tell me the dream and what it means, right now some of you would be getting little pockets of groups getting together and saying, what do you think his dream was? Right? Can we come up with some idea? At least something to kind of hold him off a little bit, right? Because he's saying, hey, I'm going to kill you if you don't answer me. To which they say, tell us, your servants, the dream, and we will tell you what it means. They don't have anything else. They're saying, you tell us, we'll tell you, king. This is how this kind of works. And King Nebuchadnezzar answered, I know you're stalling for time, which is a reasonable thing to do. Because again, there's a whole group of them, and they're all talking together, right? They're kind of saying, hey, what do we think? What do you think? You know, it has something to do with animals, war, food. We know food was a big thing for him. What do we know? So they're going around. He says, oh, I know you're stalling because you know that I meant what I said, that I'm agitated, I want an answer, I'm going to do something. If you don't tell me my dream, there is one verdict for you. You have all agreed to tell me lies and wicked things. So he notices the group's kind of talking in the group that he's talking to. He sees them kind of trying to figure this thing out, plan together. He says, I know you're going to tell me lies, Eric. Don't be trying to pull on me, you know. You're going to come up with some kind of lie just to get me off and wicked things so that I think you got the answer. You're hoping that things will change, that you'll have your life. Now tell me the dream so that I will know that you can't tell me what it really means. This is how I'm going to know if your answer is good, is if you can tell me actually the start of it and the finish of it. And if you're familiar with the story, you know that they have another response. The wise men answered the king saying, you're crazy. No, they wouldn't say they're crazy to the king. They simply say, no one on earth can do that is reveal what the king is asking. No one can do this. I mean, if you give us a dream, we can come up with some kind of answer, right? You know? Anybody of you have those kind of dreams where you're running, you wake up and you don't remember what you were running from? Anybody else out there? Or any of you have the falling dream? Yeah, that's the worst, isn't it? You're like, you wake up and it's like just before you hit the ground, right, you know? And you go to somebody, tell me what that means. Oh, you have a lot of anxiety in your life right now, you know? You can come up with anybody can come up with any kind of explanation if you give you some start, right? Especially if your life is on the line. But if I got to come up with the dream and the explanation, and just let me do the explanation. No great and powerful king has ever asked the enchanters, diviners, or wise men to do this. Which if I'm sitting in that crowd, I have to think to myself, here's this guy who's king of the world. I mean, at this point, Babylon is the world power. They keep conquering groups. They've just done Egypt. They're going to come back and wipe out some more of Egypt. They're going to go back to Jerusalem and wipe out some stuff there. They keep expanding their power. This guy is the most powerful man in the world, and to tell him no other king has ever asked anybody this doesn't make any difference to him because he's the most powerful king. So you're just telling me I'm even more powerful because nobody else would ask, but I can ask. The king is asking something that is too hard. It's ridiculous. It's preposterous. It is impossible. All 4 or 5 of those syllables, however many it is. Only the gods could tell the king this. But king, the gods do not live among people. To which Nebuchadnezzar responds in a way that reminds them why it's good to be king. When the king heard their answer, he got really mad. He was already mad, right? But he got really mad, and he simply said this. He orders that all the wise men of Babylon be killed, And his order to kill the wise men was announced, and everybody goes out. These guys go out to look, sent out for Daniel and his friends, who apparently are part of this group. Because remember, Daniel's probably still pretty young, probably hasn't been there very long, so he's just kind of maybe not part of the in crowd yet. They're still working up to that thing, but he's considered part of this because that's what his training's for. So they got to look for him. And Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, was going to kill the wise men of Babylon. A little background there, and he says, but Daniel spoke to him. And he spoke to him with wisdom and skill, that is deference. Now listen, I can understand Daniel speaking to him with desperation and fear, but with wisdom and deference, this kind of skill of saying, let me ask you a question here, Eric. What's this whole stuff about? That's what he says. Why did the king order such a severe punishment? What's the story here? Because he hasn't been part of it. And I want you to notice that Daniel doesn't tell Arioch, this is unfair. I wasn't part of there. I wasn't part of this group. I'm not there. We just got here. We haven't been here that many years. We're not part of this group. That's not fair what you're doing. Now, how can you hold us accountable? Can't you put off the test till tomorrow? You didn't give us enough study notes. All the stuff that a teenage boy would say. But Arioch explains everything to Daniel. The whole dream, that he's got this dream and nobody seems to know what it is, and it's scary because he wants both the dream and the answer, not just the answer. So Daniel goes to King Nebuchadnezzar, which is another bold move, and he asks for some time so that he could tell the king what his dream meant. Which is kind of weird, isn't it? The king is really upset. None of his group of wise men, all these different kind of people, the diviners, the people that are throwing sticks, the people that are shaking sticks, the people that are yelling to the gods, all this kind of, none of them has had anything, and he's just said, wipe them all out. But Daniel goes to him and says, hey, king, give me some time so I can tell you the dream. Which tells you how agitated the king is over this dream, even more so than over the wise men. Because apparently he grants Daniel some time. And I love this. Then Daniel went to his house and explained the whole story to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And after he explains this whole situation to them, king has this dream. He gets all the wise men together. By the way, we weren't there, but we're part of the wise men, so we're part of this group. They can't give him the answer he's looking for. We're all going to die. This is where we're at right now, guys. And he says to them, and he asked them to pray, that is, ask the God of heaven would show them mercy, that is compassion, and help them understand this mystery. We're in a tough spot. And I'm going to ask you to pray for us. We're going to ask God to show some compassion on us and help us to understand this crazy request of this king. But I love the next thing, the reason why he says we're going to pray to God. Catch this. We got to pray so we don't get killed with the rest of them, right? Daniel's not thinking of, God, I don't want anybody to die here. He just doesn't want to be considered part of them in order to get all wiped out. So we need to pray. And we need to ask God, will show us some compassion, some mercy, help us to understand what's going on. And I want you not to miss this. Daniel wasn't fearless. So often we look at these stories. We tell our kids these stories. Some of you have grown up with these stories your whole life, Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone. That's all I know because I didn't grow up around this kind of situation, but that's what I've picked up over the years, right? How else does it go? Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone? You guys don't know it either, really? Okay, yeah, forget it. It's not working, all right? But we've heard Daniel as this great man of faith, right? He stood up to the king about food and said, I'm not eating this food. He comes now and says, give me some time. I'm going to tell you what this dream's about. That's not the picture. That's not the real picture. He's afraid. But his fear doesn't kind of make him go crazy and yelling and screaming and kind of, complaining. His fear kind of says, with wisdom and tact, to the guy who's out to kill him and say, hey, okay, just give us a little bit of time. Let me go see if we can get this answer for you. And we need to pray. But not only wasn't Daniel fierce, he saw faith as his only hope. And how often do you find yourself in a crisis where sometimes it takes you a little while to figure out that faith is your only hope? Because I don't know if you're like me, but normally when a crisis happens, I'll be honest with you, my first response is not normally to pray. My first response is turn the water off, right? Turn the electricity off. Whatever's gone wrong, stop whatever it is. Let's kind of contain the damage, and then let's try to figure out what we're going to do. But sometimes you find yourself in one of those situations that you have no other choice than to pray. You come on a scene of an accident, and someone's hurt, and you haven't even played a doctor on TV. You don't know anything about how to do this, right? But you just start holding stuff and putting stuff and pulling stuff and trying to help, and you're praying at that moment because that's all you have. And that's where Daniel finds himself. He chooses faith because faith is the only option he has at this moment. I mean, the guys can't come up with, again, if the king had told them the dream, they would have come up with some answers. I mean, teenage boys are smart. They got crazy minds, right? They could come up with some explanation of what the dream was about. If they knew what the dream was, they don't get any more than what the other guys got. And here's the thing I want you not to miss, and I have to understand, in going through the book of Daniel, this is not so much about personal application, it's about understanding the story of Daniel and how God worked in his life, and not so much about how he works in our lives, but just this picture of what took place, and this idea of prophecy and the idea of God giving those things. And for a second, we're going to discover why God gives those things. But here's the thing that we can take away. You can prepare for hard places. Everybody in this room, everybody watching online, you ought to have $400 in a savings account that's there for a rainy day. By the way, that was a helpful little tip today. No charge through that end, right? But think if you had $400 or even $500 in a little safe place, so when something bad happened, you didn't go, you went, oh, hey, I can get through this because I have that money already sitting there. That's a way that you can prepare for something to take place. You can't prepare for everything, but you can prepare for some things. You can prepare for hard places, but you just can't know what you'll do in them. Because when you're in them, you're in them. And all your preparations sometimes don't work. I know some of you have had kids and you went through all the how many of you went through birthing classes before you had kids? Raise your hands nice and high, right? In birthing classes, they talk about the little butterfly breath. I'm out of breath right now because I'm doing it. All right, but they talk about, you get your little bag, you're all prepared to go. So when the wife says, I think something's going on, we got to go real quick. How many of you had all your preparations, but when that moment hit, that happened, that you ran out of the house and you forget something? How many of you, honestly, right? It happens. All your preparation goes out because at that moment you're in that hard place. And that's where Daniel finds himself. And that's where we find ourselves at times. That you can't prepare for hard places. You just can't know for 100% sure this is what I would do. Even though we always do that to somebody else. Which always reminds me of how fun it is. We have such great advice for other people in their lives, right? When you tell me your problem, I got an answer for you. I can fix any problem in your life. Stop it, start it, don't. I mean, that's pretty much it, or do. But when it comes to me, hold on a second here. There's a whole lot more going on. You have to understand my feelings, my understanding, my thoughts behind it, and what ifs and all that. We kind of get all worn down. And that's why there's kind of lists and stuff of being prepared. I think there's some helpful stuff to it, but you don't really know what you're going to do until you're in that spot. For Daniel and for the guys, they pray. They ask God for a lifeline, an extra call. And during that night, God revealed the mystery to Daniel in a vision. I love this Corrie ten Boom quote. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. If you don't know who she is, you need to Google her. Great story. Great story of faith. Great story of somebody who, in those moments, wasn't fearless, but was faithful and tried to do the right thing and trust God through it all. And that's what Daniel does. And so God reveals this mystery to him. He goes to the king. The king asked Daniel, who was also called Belteshazzar, we heard about that last week, are you able to tell me what I dreamed and what it means? Are you able to tell me both those things? Because that's what I need to know. To which Daniel says, no. Which is why you need to read your Bible, because he says, no wise man, enchanter, diviner, or astrologer can explain to the king the secret mystery he has asked about, which the short answer is no, right? But he says, nobody can do this. I mean, they were right when they said, this is preposterous, this is crazy, you're asking too much, king. But there is a God in heaven. And this God in heaven who explains, that is, reveals secret things and mysteries. Wow, what you're asking is crazy, and no one can give you the answer. There is a God who can give you the answer. And I love this. And he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen at a later time, that is in the future. This prophecy wasn't so much for us 2,600 years later to say, oh, where are we in this prophecy? Oh, we're down here at the feet. This prophecy was for King Nebuchadnezzar, who thought he was something because he was something, who thought his kingdom was going to last forever and ever, like all of those kings throughout history who have sort of controlled the whole world. They thought they were going to be their kingdom was going to, and some kingdoms lasted hundreds, if not thousands of years. They went on and on and on, but at some point, they all come to an end. But this dream was for Nebuchadnezzar. God also revealed this secret, this mystery to me, not because I have greater wisdom. This wasn't one of Daniel's gifts. It wasn't like this. 21, that was the number you were just thinking of, right? 21? Just shake your head yes, it'll make me look really good, right? Okay, thank you, right? That wasn't Daniel's thing here. He isn't sort of a quick person. He's not because he's wiser than any other living person, but God revealed the secret to him so that you may know, King, you may know what it means. This was a way to communicate Nebuchadnezzar something so important to him that would set the stage for what we're going to look at over the next couple of weeks, that got Nebuchadnezzar to the place that he needed to get. That of a man who was used to being in control, who had to come to the place to recognize that he is not in control of everything, but that God is sovereign. So let's talk about this for a moment. Why Daniel is important. I think the book of Daniel is important because it's a reminder that God is sovereign. And again, go look up that word and see how it's different from control, all right? But not only is God sovereign, it's a reminder that there is a purpose and plan to life. That there's this flow in history, and even in the smaller details of your life and my life, there are moments. Moments when God does show up, moments when God could show up, moments when God would show up if we chose a faith response as opposed to I'm going to take care of this response. It's a reminder that God speaks to all kinds of people. Because Nebuchadnezzar was not a God-fearer. Even with all the gods they had, he was the king. And it was good to be king. And God still loved him and cared about him. And that's an important reminder not to miss into all this stuff and all the prophecies and all the things that we look at throughout this big sweep of history. Not to forget that God cares about all the people in all those different time periods. And because he cares about them, he cares about us as well. See, this isn't a story about how to be like Daniel. This is a story about Daniel determining to be a person of faith. And you can't determine to be a person of faith based on what Daniel did. You can only determine to be a person of faith by what you do. And how you respond to what God puts you in and through. And when you find yourself in those crises, when you find your place between the rock and the hard place, where do you turn? And what do you do? In fact, here's the question. The question is, what will you do when stuff happens? Because it will. And you can't know how you're going to respond until you get to that place. I've told people lots of times, where they've gone through a tough situation and they say, my faith is not strong enough. I say, better to find out now why you can do something about that than to think your faith is strong, but at the last moment find out it isn't. See, the decisions we make today determine the stories we tell tomorrow. That's why decisions are so important. That's why for you kids that are in this room, and as kids or anybody, for me under the age of about 25, because especially boys, because your boys, your brains don't get solidified till about 25. And that's true. Some of us a little bit later. I was about 28, but it's. But that's why so many people talk about how important these decisions are. And you think, come on, it's not a hard decision. Just graduating high school this year, I ought to have a nice ride. I just went down to the local dealership, and they let me, because you co-signed for me, Grandpa, thank you so much. I bought me a brand new Camaro. So I work at Pizza Hut 2 days a week. And somebody has said to you, that's not a very good decision, You got to think kind of a little bit broader, but at that moment, that shiny new Camaro and that sound, boom, boom, boom. By the way, the sound that the Camaros and Mustangs and all those new muscle cars make are not their real sound? You know this? They have little speakers in them. And you can tune it inside so you can make it sound like, rup, 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 or, It's crazy, right? I'm original muscle cars. I like if the car sounds like it ought to sound like it, right? Not have the little speaker. I mean, you can get a little Toyota, a little 4-cylinder Toyota and put a little speaker there, And I have no idea what it means. Oh, I know how to make some decisions. Yes, back to bad decisions. So that's why so many people in your life talk about, are you sure about this decision? Because they know that the decisions you make today determine the stories you tell tomorrow. What you tie yourself today will be what you're kind of working through tomorrow. And that's where Daniel, and again, Daniel is the story of this guy who finds himself in this situation that he had no control over. He was grabbed out of his country. He was thrown into this program. He was told he was going to become part of this kingdom. He was going to be indoctrinated and cultured into that place, and he was going to be a representative for this new nation to his old nation. And Daniel, in the midst of all that, keeps recognizing that the decisions he can make really do write the stories that are told tomorrow. And today is one of those tomorrows.